Muchas gracias. Thank you, Jill. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I had originally hoped to be here Wednesday evening so that I could enjoy and benefit from the full day yesterday, and I understand you had a wonderful and excellent day with many excellent speakers. The reason I wasn't here, and I regret I wasn't, was because a week ago my new grandson was born, and yesterday was the baby naming. So I was otherwise activated in New York, and thank you. I'll pass your congratulations along to little Jonah when he's old enough to understand. But I know he appreciated personally that I was there, but more importantly, it was obviously important for me to be there, and I truly regretted not having a chance to spend more time with you and getting to know you a little. But I would like to ask you a couple questions. I understand from yesterday's polling that it's about a third marketers, a third agencies, and a third publishers. But I'm wondering if you could raise your hands if you spend more than 50% of your work time on digital activities, digital and internet activities. And if you spend less than 50% of your time? And how many of you, if you could again raise your hand, work for companies that also have traditional legacy television, radio, newspaper, magazine businesses? And if you have internet only? More with the legacy businesses. And if you could raise your hand also if you're hungover from last night? Well, I appreciate your all being here this morning. I'm a media economist, and I believe I'm the only media economist in the world, or at least anyone who claims to be. So I think I should define for you what is a media economist. A media economist basically studies the production, the distribution, the consumption of goods and services that are media related. An economist in any field is studying production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. I study media. Now, what made me passionate about media? I spent my career at ABC Radio, at CBS Television, consulting for more than 250 companies, and 3 years ago ended the consulting practice, began joining boards of advisors of early-stage digital companies, of investing in early-stage digital companies, and publishing a report, the Jack Myers Media Business Report, that focuses on the media, the economics of media. And also I publish Media Biz Bloggers, an open thought leadership platform that you're all welcome to write for, preferably in English. But I think it'd be fun to have a Spanish version of Media Biz Bloggers. Perhaps we can start that. My friend Dave Morgan writes for Media Biz Bloggers frequently, Wenda Millard's company. MediaLink writes for Media Biz Bloggers. It's an open thought leadership platform. It gives me the opportunity to see perspectives and understand perspectives from people all around the world and all around the industry. Now, I think all of us need to take, let me ask one more question. Anyone here under 17 years old? I think you'll understand the relevance of that question. Anyone here born without television in their homes? Anyone here born without television in their homes? I'll raise my hand. This is the television that I grew up with, but my parents didn't believe in television, so I didn't have a television in my home till I was 7 years old. I was the last person in my neighborhood to have television. Now, warning to all parents who think that restricting their kids from anything is a good idea. As soon as that television came into my home, I was addicted. And I've never stopped being addicted to television and media. But I have a very unique experience in growing up my first 7 years with radio and no television. And so I'm a part of a generation that made a transition and understood that television was truly different, truly life-changing, truly life-altering. And then I remember when I was 15 years old and we got cable television in my home, and that was altering, transformational, transitional. It made a huge impact in my life, the way I looked at the world. We went from, I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. It had one television station. With cable, suddenly we had 12 television stations. And then, of course, it grew from there. And now hundreds of television stations. And most people today have so many different television channels, so many channels through the internet, so many different options and alternatives. So it's fascinating for me to think from a prism of growing up with a couple of radio stations and then one TV station to what we have today. And this is relevant today because it has an impact. The internet has an impact and digital has an impact on those who were born pre-internet and those who were born post-internet. And I'll talk a bit about that today. Now, I know you've heard a lot of speakers. I know you've had a lot of insights about digital and the internet and its impact and interactivity and data and numbers. I'm not going to share a lot of numbers with you, even though I'm an economist. What I'm going to talk to you about is your organizations, for the most part, and how you can manage the transformation that we're all experiencing, and how you can think about the way you manage, the way you deal with the daily issues, the daily realities that we're all confronting. Whether you're publisher, agency, or marketer, we're all confronting the same basic dynamics. And how we deal and manage with those dynamics, I think, will make a difference for how not only our businesses succeed and experience the digital transformation, but how consumers experience and manage the digital transformation. So my goal today is to talk about the future of advertising. Now, you've heard about the future of television, you've heard about the future of the internet, and I know you're constantly thinking about the future of advertising because it is the foundation of the revenue streams that we're all focusing on. I look at the future of advertising a little differently. I look at the future of advertising from the perspective of Samuel Johnson, 250 years ago today. By the way, Samuel Johnson's the second most quoted person in the English language other than Shakespeare. And he said, the trade of advertising is now so near to perfection that we really don't need to change it. It's hard to suggest any improvement. And I think there are many who could argue that advertising really hasn't changed much fundamentally in terms of its goals for 250 years. So as we look at that, we'd say, why do we even need to deal with the future of advertising? Advertising's been a pretty good business for 250 years. But I don't think Samuel Johnson could have perceived of the radical shifts taking place today. Not so much because of the introduction of the internet, but because venture capitalists and equity investors, Wall Street, Fleet Street, and so many other investment groups have come along to underwrite the technological companies that are based on the internet. In the past, if a company wanted to take advantage of technology, if Televisa wanted to take advantage of technology, Televisa would need to make those investments. If an agency or a marketer wanted to invest in technology, they would have to make the investments, but the investments have been made for you. You have warehouses full. Thousands of companies have been developed, fully invested in, and are sitting there on the shelves of the warehouse, like going into huge retailers, the display retailer, the social retailer, the search retailer, the video retailer, the mobile retailer. We have hundreds and hundreds of companies that are sitting there waiting for you to come to them and pluck them off the shelves. If you're interested in developing mobile, you can go into the retail store called Mobile Digital Advertising Marketing, and you can look at hundreds of companies that are there eager to do business with you and priced in a way to make it efficient for you to test them. That's a radical shift in the economics, the underlying fundamental economics of business today, that these companies are already there waiting for you. Now, as we look at these realities and as we look at these changes, we need to think, I think, about the history of transformation. Obviously, we're in a transformation. A few years ago, we talked about change and transformation, and people challenged. They thought things stayed the same. Everything old is new again. What's past is prologue. I don't think we can use those tried and true axioms anymore as we look toward the future, because change is certainly upon us. Transformation is certainly upon us. The last time we had a transformation of the magnitude that we have right now was about 100 years ago, when Henry Ford developed the assembly line, when we had the oil refineries, the steel mills, the telephones. But transformations, if you go back hundreds of years and study transformations, the common pattern is they tend to be about 30 years long. 30 years. But what's unusual about transformation is that the first 15 years are about invention, innovation. The second 15 years are about advancing those inventions, monetization, application, implementation, evaluation. So if you go back 100 years and you look at the tremendous changes that were taking place then, the telephone, the car, the airplane, the first full-length movie, you had major corporations being developed. You had the first Copyright Act. You had IBM being formed out of the consolidation of 3 companies. You had the World's Fair, where the Ferris wheel, the first Ferris wheel, was built in Chicago, and architecture was radically changed forever. But you look at that period of transformation that began in 1890, and almost all of the invention took place between 1890 and 1905. And then 1905 to the end of World War I in 1920 was about the use of that technology, the application, the implementation. And if you look at 1905, the end of the period of invention, versus 1920, the differences were radical. There was nothing truly new that hadn't been developed in those first 15 years of the transformation, but the realities of how they were being used was radically different. So as we look at the transformation today, by the way, I should add, I think it's not necessarily ironic, but it happened in 1890 at the exact beginning of that transformational period that this famous quote was said by John Wanamaker. How many of you have heard this in almost every talk that we've heard for the last 20 years? I know only half my advertising works. The problem is I don't know which half. I don't think he said that. I think he said, I know only half my advertising works. The reality is, I only know which half works. And fundamentally, I think he probably added to that, at least internally within his own organization. And you know what? I don't care that only half my advertising works. It works. It doesn't matter which half works and which half doesn't work. And that's been the basic tenet on which media and advertising have been built for the last 120 years. The industry simply really hasn't cared. They trot this out and they talk about the metrics and dynamics and measurement, but has there been really a measurement developed that answers the question of what works and what doesn't work? And the fact that that question hasn't been answered, has it really impacted negatively on the power and value of advertising? I would say it hasn't. Advertising's been an incredible growth business for more than 100 years. The fact that John Wanamaker didn't know which half of his advertising worked, and the fact that the vast majority of advertisers today don't know which half of their advertising worked, has not stopped them from increasing their ad spending year after year after year. So as we look at that reality and this point in time, we say, can it hold? Can it continue that way? Can advertising continue to be supported without measurement of what works and what doesn't work? Well, I'm going to talk a little about that, but I want to go back to the idea of transformation and why I think the moment in time that we're in this year, right now, today, is so critically important to every one of you and every one of your organizations. If you're at an agency or a publisher, every one of your clients. If you're at a marketer, every one of your consumers, and every one of the people within your organization. This is the moment in time. Why? The internet was founded in 1993. Internet Mosaic, first browser, was introduced in 1993. 17 years ago. 17 years. Now, think about 17 years. Who else was born 17 years ago? Kids are 17 years old today, just graduated high school. They're going to college. The internet is going to college. This internet generation is moving from high school to college, and the internet is going with it. 4 years from now, this generation will be entering the workforce. 7 to 8 years from now, they will become the most dominant and important people within their organizations because they come with a completely different point of view and a completely different perspective. 17 years. The transformation we're in now began with the internet browser. We're 17 years into this 30-year period of transformation, 2 years into the period of implementation, application, monetization, evaluation. 2 years in. Now, you know, it's interesting. What led me to this was realization as I started going to more and more conferences and events like this. And I noticed something about 2 years ago, whether it was an association of national advertisers or agencies coming together or marketers, I stopped hearing the complaints about advertising. I started hearing the case studies about success. I stopped hearing the complaints about research and metrics and started hearing the stories about the companies that were providing better evaluation and metrics. And I stopped hearing the come to Jesus requests by the advertisers and the agencies pleading with publishers to get with it, marketers pleading with their agencies to step up their game. I stopped hearing that. And all of a sudden, I started hearing again the case studies. It's working. Here's what's working. Here's what we're doing. Much of it digital, but also much of it in the legacy media. And I said, why? Why is that happening? What's happening now that all of a sudden we're not hearing those negative claims that advertisers always brought to these kinds of conferences, and instead started hearing the positive, the uplifting, the good? We moved into this period of transformational implementation and out of the period of invention. We moved past the era when everyone was concerned about change and into the area when people were interested in stability. Now, in 1993, ironically and totally serendipitously, I wrote my first book called Ad Bashing: Surviving the Attacks on Advertising. And in that book, I said, marketers may be facing shifts in consumer patterns and communications for which there are no precedents and for which they are ill-prepared. It's time we took a hard look at our approaches to marketing. It was somewhat prescient. I was lucky. I was smart. But I studied the economics. And I also understood from my days growing up and getting that television and realizing the impact, and the days seeing the impact of cable, that when I saw the internet, even in 1993, I said, we're at a moment in time that we're not prepared for. Precedents that we've never experienced before. The last thing I understood and expected, though, would be that it would take 15 years to get to the period when it would truly be implemented. Now, the problem for most of us is that we continue to act as if we're in the first 15-year period of invention. I think VCs, venture capitalists, and investors are also investing in invention instead of investing in application and use of invention. So I think we're going to see the economics of the investment community shift to focus on content, on research, on supporting applications rather than inventions. So as we move forward, there are 4 points that I want to talk to you about in terms of the next 15 years and how we can focus ourselves, our professional lives, our organizations on looking toward the future instead of looking toward the past. And those 4 points are, how do we manage the disruptive change that we've been experiencing, the chaos that most of us feel as we deal with our organizational models and structures? How do we deal with the reality of commoditization? A number of years ago, Wenda spoke about pork bellies, and that became somewhat of a buzzword in the industry. But all media is faced with the realities of supply and demand, and we've moved into a world where media is oversupplied and where demand is not catching up and won't catch up in any time in the near future. So how do we deal with commoditization and build greater value for our products and our services? And how do we deal with this shift from data to analytics? And in that context, I'll talk to you a bit about the future of advertising. Those other issues are dealing in every business. It's not just advertising, media, and marketing. It's every business across the complete landscape of industry. In media and advertising, we're making a shift where there's going to be increasing focus on content and the curation of that content, the context. Online video, mobile, and enhanced TV have an almost unlimited growth future for at least the next decade to 2 decades. Social commerce and interactivity, I'll talk a bit about social commerce in the context of it being the single greatest revenue opportunity for all of our businesses. And finally, results-based metrics and the importance of metrics to our industry. So some quick numbers, just some quick numbers. And this is US data, and I'm sure you have similar percentage context here in Mexico. Online video. In the US, online originated video, if you leave out the video of CBS, ABC, the TV networks, Hulu, and others, online originated video was less than a $500 million business, $500 million to $700 million in 2011. By 2020, it'll be a $14 billion business. So if you put all online video together, it's about a $1.5 to $2 billion business, growing to about a $25 to $30 billion business. Exponential growth in just the next few years. Mobile marketing. $1 billion business this year, $1.2 billion in advertising, mobile advertising and marketing, growing to a $17 billion business in the US in 2020. Social marketing. Now, a number of people have looked at my forecast, and a significant part of my business is built on forecasting. I forecast 55 different media advertising and marketing categories. We break it out from 2000 to 2020. And we look at even the digital revenues of legacy media. And as I look at social marketing, which includes social commerce, it includes word of mouth and conversational marketing, it's a $1.2 billion business in the US today. If you add social media, display advertising on Facebook and things like that, it's about a $2.5 billion to $3 billion business. By 2020, I'm forecasting it'll be a $40 to $50 billion business. Now, a number of people have asked me what I'm smoking, and I tell them, and it helps. But the reality is that it's the fastest growing segment, and every business, not just media advertising and marketing. For you marketers there, every part of your organization has to become social in the next few years. For agencies, every part of your business, the legacy parts, the parts that are dealing with direct marketing, the parts that are dealing with creative, social, will be embedded in the culture. It's a part of every single business. We cannot extract ourselves from the tremendous shift in the culture that this generation that's going to college is bringing with them because they grew up social. They know nothing else. That's their culture. That's their society. We bring a very different perspective because we didn't grow up necessarily with it. Or even if we did, Facebook wasn't a part of our youth. It wasn't a part of our dynamic. We weren't tweeting about the television shows we watch or something we liked or our friends. I'm fielding a major study now comparing kids who are 16 and 17 to those who are 20 and 21, and I'm looking forward to seeing whether there are the differences that I expect will exist in just those few years. So let's talk about the 4 issues. Change versus stability. How many of you here consider yourself to be change agents in your organizations? Change agents? Change agents? Well, it's about 20% of the room who consider yourself to be change agents. Well, I'd like to make a suggestion to every single one of you. Never refer to yourself as a change agent again. Change agents are not well respected in their organizations. They're brought in historically, and how long they last is dependent on the organization, but they're disruptive. They create chaos. Their goal is to make changes in organizations that don't view change as a positive, they view change as a negative. What do organizations really want? What do they really need? They want and need stability. So I think every one of you who calls yourself a change agent should instantly change and become the organization's stability agent. Because what you're doing by being the investors in the future, by being those who understand the future, by being those who bring new ideas, new organizational cultures, who bring new companies that are out there on the horizon that might help them, you're creating stability for the future. You're not creating change. What creates change for most organizations is a refusal to embrace the digital age. What creates stability for an organization is embracing it. So I would argue that change agents are in fact stability agents. And I think we all need to change our perception of how we approach the fundamental aspects of what we think about when we think about our businesses. We can't think that change is the dynamic that will lead to success. Stability is the dynamic that will lead us all to a successful future, and stability comes from embracing that warehouse full of VC and equity invested companies that are there asking us to do business with them, leading us into the future, guiding us for very little investment. So, change agents, I think it's time to exit. Stability agents, it's time for us to come to the future. Now, what about integration? We've got a lot of chaos when companies try to integrate. For years, I've been an advocate of integration. In fact, in my years with CBS, I argued that we had to bring in new business ideas, new business models, and integrate them into our organizations. As a consultant, I argued for integration. But what I've realized through my years of study of the industry is that integration is not a successful business model. I think what's a more successful business model is to think about how we integrate capabilities. Now, I just gave you a glimpse of where I'm going. Think that image. How many of you have heard the story about the railroad magnates in the early 1900s? And what did you hear? You heard that if they had understood they were in the transportation business instead of in the railroad business, they would have gotten into airlines and they would have had a future instead of being relegated to a smaller, declining railroad business for decades. Well, I have a thought that if, in fact, those railroad magnates, starting with Vanderbilt, had invested in airplanes and taken over the airline business, this is what the airplane would look like today. We can't necessarily integrate new business models into legacy business models and expect them to embrace each other. We can't expect you to understand the culture of the 16-year-old who's just coming into college and will be in the workforce. We can't expect those who have been doing what's been done in the past to have the dynamic and understanding of where the future is headed. So I believe in functional integration. Bob Greenberg from RGA gave a great presentation at Cannes this year at the Media Alliance talking about functional integration and how he's changing his agency for the future. And it talks about letting each group dynamically work for itself and be its own focus to create entropy. Entropy is physics, basically. When mass grows, it disintegrates. When you try to grow businesses, they become more chaotic. So integration actually creates disintegration within an organization. But if you create pockets of energy and control their size and focus on their function and their core and their capabilities and their passions and what they really believe in, and then for specific tasks, for clients, for projects, for tool development, for resources, you bring the different functions together. Whether it's an agency or a sales organization or a marketer, you functionally integrate around different pockets of energy. And commoditization versus value pricing, well, I believe that fundamentally we have to start thinking about content. And we have to start thinking about bringing greater value to the content that has strong, meaningful brands to consumers. And we need to start building social and mobile and video and all the different assets that digital enables us to provide and building it into our video. Now, there was a great program on ABC a few years ago called Lost. Why didn't Lost, that had 50 different blog sites with millions of people blogging about Lost, but yet Disney and ABC didn't capture any of their names, any of their email addresses, any of their identities. They didn't create the Lost game that could have featured virtual currencies and virtual goods. They didn't create a model so that when they sell the DVD or make it available on Hulu or Netflix or iTunes, that they can market to people. They didn't create the marketplace for Lost. When you have a hit television series, a successful magazine, an important newspaper, you need to develop out the assets socially and around all the future revenue models that social creates and that virtual models create. And I believe more and more marketers will move toward a business model focused on relating to consumers through the media brands that consumers are passionate about. But we will continue to have commoditization. So we've got this separation of mass media, which will continue to be strong, continue to be important, be low margin, be limited to those who can in fact provide scale of audience at very cheap prices. And then we have that marketplace of value, and that marketplace of value will be driven by content and content distribution. Mass media will continue, in my opinion, for many decades ahead to be king, and it will be more and more difficult to find those true mass media vehicles like broadcast television, prime time, live sports, and other mass media vehicles. But relevant content will be queen and will be increasingly important. 95% of every dollar spent on marketing today is targeted toward mass media. I believe by 2020 it'll be more like 30-70, maybe 35-65. And by 2030 it'll be 50-50. So content is the growth area, and mass media becomes more and more difficult to compete in because audiences will be more and more difficult to aggregate. And if you're not mass and if you don't have relevant content, you may be familiar with Aces Up Eights, Wild Bill Hickok's hand when he was killed. I don't think there's much future if you don't have mass or relevant content, if you're a media supplier. I think vertical networks and others have to figure out exactly what they are, what marketplace they're operating in, and I think we'll have shrinkage to those who can provide true mass. And then finally, quantitative data versus performance analytics. Quantitative data, the quanteds, will continue to be prominent. But the fundamentals of research in the media and advertising industry truly haven't changed since John Wanamaker's days. Yes, we have Nielsen and we have other forms of media measure. We have Kantar, and we have developments across the landscape that are focused on quantity of audience. They serve a shrinking marketplace. They will continue to be important, and I think we're putting too much emphasis on how we develop out those models and improve them. They've been doing a fine job. Leave them alone. The investment opportunities are with companies like Dave Morgan's Simul Media, a company like TRA that's putting credit card, loyalty card data together with set-top box data. Market Share Partners, a company in LA that's doing predictive marketing mix analytics. Bluefin that's combining social metrics with television metrics. There are hundreds of companies that are doing fascinating and interesting things in the analytics business, helping us understand, and the John Wanamaker quote will never again be relevant from this day forward. The John Wanamaker quote, if it still is relevant in your organization, then you're not moving quickly enough into the digital world and taking advantage of the many, many companies that are out there serving your goals. So the future of advertising, number one, foremost, understand your mission, understand your goals, understand the purpose of your organization and the purpose you personally have in your own job and in your own career. Why are you there? What are you looking to achieve? And what future are you looking for? Become a stability agent instead of a change agent. Energize your organization through pockets of functional focus instead of trying to integrate across multiple platforms and bringing them together into an organization that will become less functional, not more functional. And its size and its relevance. It's both. But very few companies will be able to play in both categories. And I believe we have television networks that are failing today to move quickly enough to recognize and monetize the relevance of the content they have. I think newspapers, in the United States at least, have been too slow. And they may have killed the golden goose because they had tremendous relevance that they never monetized effectively. Magazines are one of the greatest asset opportunities in media today because consumers relate. But engagement to drive mass, quantitatively measured advertising is not where it's going. It's going to social, and to digital, and to video. And analyze your performance. Analyze what you're doing and how you got there and where you're going. And the analytics tools and resources are there and available for you. Thank you very much.